3, 2, 1.
And good morning, and welcome to the Board of County Commissioners work session for April 30, 2020. This is going to be on budget. And before we get into introductions, if you want to call in, you can call in at 360-252-9020. That's 360-252-9020, and your PIN number is 1234. Got that done. Okay. So let's start with introductions before we get into this action-packed, fun-filled, great information because it set us up for the whole day, and that's the budget. I'm Commissioner John Hutchings, the chair of the board, and I also see Vice Chair Commissioner Ty Menser and Commissioner Gary Edwards, and Ramiro Chavez, our county manager, our assistant county manager, Robin Campbell, and we have Denise Doty. And Olivia, don't tell me, I'm gonna get it.
Okay, you got it.
Osmond, yep.
There you go.
And I think we have Elizabeth Petrich also on Zoom. And so with that, let's go ahead and begin the budget work session and let the fun begin.
So good morning, commissioners. This is a follow-up to a few budget meetings that we've had now. And I am encouraging you to move closer to a strategy on how we can save money at the county, a substantial amount of money. I'm going to begin today's session by sharing my screen. And let's see, every one of these things that we use is a little different. So what I'm going to share with you, if I can get it to come up, is headlines from around the nation. And Denise has been collecting these headlines and sending them to me. But they underscore the severity of what we're facing. So just running down the headlines, this out just yesterday, economists agree there is going to not be a quick rebound from this recession. No quick rebound is likely. The U.S. jobless claim is 5.2 million. That erases a whole decade of job gains in just 6 weeks. Evidence of the virus's effect grows more ominous. More about the job claims. The stocks slide as the virus slams retail sales and manufacturing. The International Money Fund says that the U.S. economy is expected to contract 5.9%, which is the worst since the Great Depression. This is not the Great Recession of 10 years ago. This is the Great Depression that they're comparing this to. The world economic growth projections are in the negatives. Again, references to the Great Depression. This is going to be a global crisis like no other. Here's the numbers from the Wall Street Journal about the stock market. The Dow is down, the S&P is down, the NASDAQ's down. They're not bouncing back. Oil has crashed, which is an unexpected market given what we've closed down is restaurants and entertainment. But this is what the economy does when it starts to recede. One main sector drops, but that's not the only sector that drops. The other ones come down too. Again, here's an old report that the jobless claims are 20 million now. Our factories are starting to close. Manufacturing is posting the largest drop since 1946, which is just after the World War. And just this last little bit of news, or it's not news, it's just putting things in context. Of the roughly 25,000 new unemployment claims in Thurston County, that represents about 17% of our labor force, our civilian labor force. So this is no small thing, and the businesses are not expected to just open up again when the stay-at-home order is lifted and everything go back to normal. The economists are saying even when the stay-at-home orders are reversed, that the majority of Americans are not going to return to what was normal life before the virus. We're not going to start going back and eating out in restaurants. We're not going to go out shopping. I will say that online shopping has seen a big boost, but it is our local businesses that we're not going to be back to. That is going to spur bankruptcies and also affect the unemployment rate. The people are not going to just start going back to the movies. We won't see large events anytime this year is the new prediction. They won't come back in 2020, and it will be a slow recovery. So I'm sorry to share a doom and gloom analysis for the start of your Thursday morning, but we need to get our heads around just how severe this is. This is no small downturn. How do I stop share? There it is. Stop sharing the screen. So, with that in mind, we'll return to what began as the conversation yesterday on how much certain budget strategies could save. So we can go through that. And this is, I don't want to take up all this time talking. This is an opportunity for you to discuss amongst yourselves which of these strategies you would like to pursue. We are here, your budget staff are here to give you information and track down any of the information you want. So I can begin by sharing some information that you had already asked for and the documents that I sent out last night. First, we'll look at, and these are available online if anyone who's watching would like to see the documents. First, we'll look at the one that is the general fund by department. It is the budgeted expenditures compared to actual. And the way you would read this worksheet is starting at the top on page 1, we have the assessor's office. From 2007 to 2020, you see how much the assessor's budget was. You see how much the assessor's office actually spent and the variance. Then the small italic number is the amount of reversion, and the number in red, the percentages in red is the percent of growth. So let's take, for example, 2018 for the assessor.
Robin?
Yes.
Before we get into the meat of this, just based on the your opening preamble, I have like 2 questions, and I don't know if the other commissioners have a question or not, but my first question is, with the spike or the increase of online spending, is that going to fill, are we to see that filling any of the gap in loss of sales tax at the point of destination?
So I'm going to say no. I'm hesitating here for a reason. The reason that I'm hesitating is because will it fill the gap? Sure, it's going to fill some of it.
Yeah.
Will it fill the whole gap? No, nowhere close. We were projecting a certain amount of revenue that included that revenue, and we're not going to get it now. So it's fair to say with everyone saying that this is going to be at least as much as the recession, they're going to lose at least 9 to 13%, and that is a minimum. That is not a worst case scenario.
Okay, and the other question I have is, and I'll turn it over to my seatmates, and that is, you said we're going to have to look at a substantial balance to hold to fill. What's substantial? Is that 5 million, 8 million?
I
What
think
type of guess?
we need to plan for at least 5 million. And the reason I say that that's substantial is when we have a budget of $108 million and we have to save $5 million in 6 months, then you take that percentage on half of the budget, and we're talking about a 9% budget cut that over the course of 6 months, if all we have to save is $5 million. If you delay and we don't enact cuts until October, and we still think it's only $5 million, then your budget cut is going to be closer to 18 to 19% of the budget would have to be cut. Time is of the essence here.
So if we kick it down until October, it'll be more substantial rather as opposed to July.
Right.
The other month, July?
Right. That's
Okay.
why you see jurisdictions starting to enact budget savings now.
Got it. Okay.
Because the longer you have, the less severe the cut has to be.
All right. Commissioner Edwards.
Robin, you made a comment earlier about new jobless or new unemployment for Thurston County, and you gave a percentage. Is that the total percentage for the county, or you said new? And I'm curious what that means. I'm looking for the total.
So in the last 4 weeks, 4 to 5 weeks, we've seen new claims of about 25,000 new filings for unemployment. If you think about, roughly 5,000 claims a week, we have the precise number. It started to drop off a little, but it's roughly 5,000 claims a week. When we had been seeing closer to 500 claims a week. So they've increased, and our civilian labor force is about 140, I want to say 143. Is that right, Denise? But that's where I get the 17% of our labor force has filed for unemployment in the last few weeks. That is not our unemployment rate.
That's what I'm wondering about.
We're looking to get that from Employment Security. I don't think that's out yet.
So we don't have that. Have we got the projection from the state yet on what they're looking at?
No one has issued any projections.
When you say 143,000 civilian, is that government employees and private enterprise, or you're saying civilian, everything but military?
Everything but the military.
Okay, good, thank you. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Menser, do you have anything?
Nothing yet.
Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead, Robin.
So just to put it again, to go back to the new information, I'm providing new information and how to read it. So back to the budget compared to actuals. The way to read this chart, taking the assessor as an example and looking toward the right of the page at 2018, to put this in English sentence. In 2018, the assessor had a budget of $4.3 million. He spent $4.2 million, roughly. This is in rough numbers. The amount he did not spend that was reverted to the general fund, $79,167, which was 1.86% of his budget in a reversion. And then the other information you have here is that the budget grew from 2017 to 2018 by 3.67%. You have that information for every office and department funded from the general fund for every year from 2007 to 2019, and then we have the budgeted amount for 2020. So that's what this chart is, just to, when you ask, how much is an office or department not spending of their budget, you have that information. Next, we'll look at the workforce trend that you had asked for, and this speaks to the comments that you have received from elected officials, that some of them are operating with FTEs that are less than they had prior to the Great Recession. So if you look at this table, this is general fund only, and we'll
This table. She's moving to this table.
one with yellow,
Yeah.
it's a one-page document.
The one that says workforce trends.
Yep, workforce trends. Yep, that's the title. So I'm not going to start with the sheriff because that one's a little bit complicated. I'm going to drop to the prosecuting attorney. In 1993, the prosecuting attorney had 46.64 FTEs. Then you have 2008, because at the time this chart was first prepared, people were asking what's the 15-year change. So you see that the prosecuting attorney in 2008 had 66.45 FTEs. That is the year prior to the recession. So you see that in 2010, that was when the county was in the depth of the recession. The prosecutor had dropped to 60.75 FTEs. And then you go along and you see that there were, additions and subtractions in the prosecutor's office. But over in 2020, you see that the prosecutor now has 67.6 FTEs, or just over one more FTE than he had in 2008. So you've got that information for every office and department. There are a few that are a little complicated. One is the sheriff, because in 1993, the sheriff and corrections was a combined budget. They were broken apart after 1993. So we only have the FTE number that was combined of 160. But you do have the 2008 numbers for the sheriff. So you can see that in 2008, the sheriff had 115.25 FTEs. And in 2020, in the general fund, the sheriff has 116.94 FTEs. In corrections, they had 111 FTEs in 2008 and 107.61 FTEs in 2020. But you see that for corrections, it's shaded kind of a peach color. And the reason that some are shaded in peach is because beginning in 2019, we took treatment sales tax and detention sales tax funded positions and moved them into those funds. So the money doesn't flow. It's part of the direct appropriation change. So you see in the bottom left corner how many FTEs were moved to those other funds. So to have a comparable number to 2008 for corrections, you would have to add together the 107.61 to the 21.39 FTEs that were moved out. So really the sheriff's got just under 130 FTEs at the jail. If you, we group law and justice separate from all the others in the general fund because I often get the question, what percent is law and justice? You see that at the bottom of the budget versus actual of the budget. The law and justice is about 75%. The FTEs, I'd have to do the math, but it looks roughly the same. So we've heard the assessor say that he has less FTEs now. That is absolutely true. In 2008, the assessor had 37 FTEs, and in 2020, he has 31 FTEs. He has one FTE charged to a different fund, though, and that's where the third table that I sent to you last night comes in. It looks like this. It's out of the budget book. And it's titled Budget and FTEs by Department. And I sent you this because with this, you see the total budget in FTEs. The other two tables were only general fund. This allows you to see total budget for 2019 and 2020 and all of the funds that office or department are paid for or from. So the assessor, as the example, has 31 FTEs paid from the general fund and one FTE paid from the real estate excise tax fund. So that was, in a nutshell, the additional information that you've been provided. Those are the only things that.
Robin, Ty has a question. Go ahead, Ty.
Well, I just want to run one more hypothetical through to make, not hypothetical, but one more example to make sure I understand, because the treasurer also mentioned that. So if I look at this chart, he had 12 employees in 2008. He's got 9 in 2020, which is a 25%. I'm using round numbers. It's 11, 9, and 8, 9. So that's a 25% reduction. And then if I go to the last sheet that shows other things, I'm seeing that in addition to the 8.9, there's about 3.7 additional. So that's 12.6. But I don't necessarily know in 2008 whether he had additional FTEs in the same way. So
That's absolutely true. And,
Okay.
and you're reading it correctly. So just wanted to affirm that. But what we don't know, and we could probably research, I don't know how much time this would take, is the total Oh, Denise, you already did that. We have a similar table. I just want to double check the numbers before we send it to you because something about it looked a little odd. But we can get you the numbers for prior years, so you're also seeing the trend in total. What I know happened during the recession is that some offices moved FTEs that were being paid for out of the general fund to restricted funds where that was allowable. And so I don't know if the treasurer had these FTEs in the restricted funds all along, or if that was a shift. I know that the clerk has done that, and you heard Mary Hall talk about that yesterday, how she has already shifted employees from the general fund to the restricted funds. Now, I did want to touch on that today because our offices and departments, that is not an option for them to exercise on their own. They need the board's approval before they shift FTEs between funds. This is an appropriation table. This says that Mary will charge these FTEs to this fund. She doesn't get to choose where she wants to charge the FTE. That's got to be part of the budget amendments. So I was surprised to hear her say that. She will be surprised to hear me say what I'm telling you right now. But we need to know the whole plan. And we need to be aware that general fund is not the only fund affected. So we need to look at all the funds.
You get what you needed, Ty?
Yeah, I just to kind of wrap up this point, it looks like the numbers do bear out what at least the treasurer, assessor, there might be others, but what they are articulating yesterday, that there hasn't been necessarily equal growth across departments in staffing from 2010, which you're calling the low point, back to 2020. Over the last decade, we've replenished these in unequal ways, which is something at least to be considered as we go forward.
As we consider that, I would also add again that all things regarding budgeting, all things are not equal.
Right. That was another big takeaway from yesterday too.
Yeah. Gary, go ahead.
I guess as we move forward on this, I would like to see all of the FTEs associated with any of the offices and departments all totaled out, instead of having to go to different charts to look at what other fund might be funding extra FTEs. And so I'd like to see something that gives a complete total without having to look around and maybe have an asterisk by that particular total. And then in a different column, you could say, well, this, there's 4 FTEs funded here by treatment sales tax, or whatever it is.
It's right here.
I'll have that for you next week.
Or you want for the whole history?
Yeah, well, I mean, as we go along, rather than, well, this is a difficult one, because we funded this out of this, and if you look over here, you'll find that. And I just don't see that is very easy to follow, especially for citizens that might be wanting to follow what we're doing.
Yeah.
It is complicated.
But isn't that what this one does without the asterisk? Is that what this?
It does some of it.
But
Yeah.
I think Commissioner Edwards would like to see this similar to this table, but in past years.
Yeah, but for a total at FTEs as we go along, so we can assess, I know different funds, all the different entities get different funds from different areas. And if we start dividing that out, about this entity has 10 people on this fund, 4 from this fund, 2 from this fund, I want to see the total when it's all said and done.
Right. So this table will give you the totals of 2019.
Yeah, but that doesn't give us a comparison all the way up. You're trying to give a comparison all the way through.
Okay, gotcha.
So we have a table that is only FTEs and not budget, total FTEs.
Got it.
I just need to double check the numbers because I saw something on it that I need to check with Denise about. But I should be able to give that to you next week.
Hey, Gary?
Yes, sir.
Okay, go ahead, Robin. Thank you.
Okay. So again, I can walk through the here's how much you save for budget cuts, if that would be the most useful part of your time, but I don't think it would. I think that the 3 of you need to discuss what you're willing to go forward with and what we need to just take right off the table, with the understanding that you need to save about $5 million at least.
Okay, I realize what you're talking about, but I haven't heard anything about enhancing revenue. And I want to do everything that we can do to enhance our economic engine to get it going as soon as possible. Not lingering for 6 months over a particular issue. And that means get regulatory roadblocks out of the way, because what's coming is we're going to have a growth boom at some point in time in the South Puget Sound. And we might as well get with it and capitalize on the influx of revenue.
And so that's a different topic. I mean, it's all related, of course, but this isn't about changing ordinance and changing regulation and such. It's about what are we gonna do with the numbers that we have
A lot of this stuff can be
Like
done
July.
through policy.
for some type of cuts, or reductions. Okay, so,
So I do want to address Commissioner Edwards. I think that is a excellent thing to look at. Changing regulations to spur economic growth. We would need to know how long it would take to adopt the changes in the regulations. I think those would need to go through the planning process. Then we would need to estimate how much growth and when that might happen. And we could certainly do those things, but I would suggest to you that that would not come in the next 6 months.
Well, I differ with that opinion. I believe that we are dealing in a new reality. Those regulations were put in place in the old reality. And we better get to thinking outside the box here if we're gonna help our community get back on its feet as soon as we possibly can. And that means get the regulatory bureaucratic process out of the way, and we can do so without hurting the environment if we utilize a little common sense. And these 6-month delays, I don't think the public is going to accept that that's a good way to do business as we're trying to get our economic engine going again.
well, those are good populist sound bites. And I don't disagree with the economic engine and such going on. But what I'm understanding is thinking the new way, out of the box, to get people moving, get the economy going, get the bureaucrats out of the way. What I get the bottom line is that's a reduction of fees and paying for services for employees' work. And that's going to affect our bottom line and our revenue, cut it even further. So what is that going to do on the backside? How will that enhance versus the decrease that we experience now in the loss of revenue?
Well, I didn't,
It's an important discussion to have. That's why we're engaged with the chamber and with the EDC and the VCB and all the other groups that push that to help keep that economy going. And we're benefiting, we're going to help that in any way we can, working with those partners.
well, the revenue is gonna come in if we get out of the way. I'm just gonna use the Master Builders Association as an example. They're chomping at the bit, ready to go. They've got projects in the works and we're still holding them up. We could do more tabletop authorization as things move forward. There's a lot of things we could do that are policy driven that we don't have to do the bureaucratic nightmare process of making an ordinance adjustment.
Right. And I think we just did about 6 or 8 of those just about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, and we followed the old
Along with
rules,
the
it takes a
OMB.
while. We need to go faster. We need to get the regulatory roadblocks out of the way.
Ramiro,
Maybe follow up, and I totally agree on the perspective of we need to look at the regulations, how we can enhance the economic recovery. That even if those changes and regulations are in place now, we will not be able to mitigate this gap by the end of the year.
That was my point.
And because the $5 million, we need to start taking actions in July in order to achieve that. And even if all the regulations that you're talking about, Commissioner, are in place today, we will not be able to recover that $5 million in revenue by the end of the year.
That very well might be, but we better get to thinking outside the box and get things moving.
And I understand the difficult position the board is at this point. And that is a very difficult position for you to start making very difficult decisions as to how we're gonna mitigate the $5 million gap through the end of the year. And that is the decision before you.
Well,
so in 2 months, we have to figure out how we're going to think outside of the box, and come up to fill that $5 million gap. That's
So
at hand.
You don't have 2 months to figure it out.
Yeah.
Because whatever of these items you choose, we need to be at the table bargaining with the union. We need time to put these things in place. It takes a little bit to dial these programs back. So no, you don't have 2 months. You've got a few weeks.
I'm ready to do it right now. We've already made a decision on what's needed in government and what's nice in government. What's nice has not taken place at all, basically, for the last month. What's needed, we've kept these people out working in their fields, and so that's a pretty good idea of where the priorities need to lie. So I am ready to move forward.
Okay. So we have 20 minutes now. Do you want to start discussing your suggestions, either commissioner, or where you'd like to go next? When's the next budget session that we're going to have, Robin?
I'll set one up for next week.
An hour and a half?
I will see how much time I can get.
Because if we need to make the decisions, I'm ready to make decisions. I'm ready to have the discussions, the meaningful discussions, so we can make these decisions. But I'm not going to do, I can't do it in a vacuum, of course. And I'm not going to rush to judgment, but I'm not going to drag my feet either.
I believe as we move forward here, we need to take a look at what we did over the past 6 weeks, for an example, and show which were the needed jobs that we kept and which were the nice jobs that we would like to have if everything was perfect, but we didn't feel that it was necessary to keep that part of government functioning at that level. So I'd like to see what FTEs were kept on the payroll or on the job, if you will, because we kept everybody on the payroll. Some just didn't go to work. So I think we need to review exactly how we did business over the last 6 weeks and then move forward from there, comparing what did we determine already was a necessary function of government? What had we determined already that was a nice function of government that we got along fine without doing?
Who is the we? You talking about the independent electeds or the commissioners?
We as in what?
Well, which employees we determined are essential? Who's the we?
Well, I think the policy decision makers that are probably here and other elected officials that made decisions as well.
That's the clarifying question I needed.
Yes.
And thank you.
So Romero and I have information from Human Resources on how many positions from each office and department were on paid administrative leave. We can certainly bring that forward.
Yeah, we can
Thank
probably
you.
bring that next week.
Yeah, but Gary, are you separating that? Because so many were put on admin leave and paid, but weren't here. You want to know how many were kept here as essential?
Yep, essential employees throughout the government that we control through our government.
Okay.
And then those that were basically furloughed during this time. I think that kind of shows where we're at, where we need to go, where our priorities need to be.
Yeah, and also, we'll bring that information, but keep in mind, the county offices are close to the public. So when we open the offices to the public, then staff that serves the public needs to be put into account. So there's a lot of individuals that perhaps because of we don't have the interaction with the public, perhaps they were put in paid administrative leave. That doesn't mean they're not essential when we open the office to the public. So we bring that information, but please keep that in mind. The county business access, public access has been closed for the last 6 weeks.
Yes, I realize that, but
There are also things that you can delay for a short time that you cannot delay for a long time. So part of what you will see is that the number of employees who were on paid administrative leave in the first 2 weeks, there will be substantially less as time goes on.
well, I think we can make that determination as we move forward, once we get that information. We know that we need to keep collecting garbage, for an example, or things are gonna go to pot. We know we have to have law enforcement officers out there, or things are gonna go to pot. Same way with the corrections officers, same way with judges and the criminal justice component. The assessor needs to continue making assessments of property value. But what was not done and was postponed, we need to review those first and see which one of those can we continue with that postponement, if you will, under the new reality. Not because the law said this or that from the old law, because we're gonna develop new laws, new ways of doing business from henceforward. It's just coming, and we better get used to it.
Commissioner Menser, do you have anything to add?
That was a lot to take in there. You know, the takeaway I heard from yesterday's meeting was that staff cuts should be our last resort. That was an inclination I had myself anyway, but it was good to hear it from pretty much all the elected officials who have, you know, knowledge of their own departments as well as in some cases the prior downturn. So my inclination would be to, going back to a point Robin made at the beginning of the session, is that the earlier to me there's a bucket of, none of this is easy, but there's a bucket of easier decisions and there's a bucket of harder decisions. And I think we should be making basically all the easy decisions and making them immediately so that we get the most bang for the buck out of those easier non-staff cut related moves, and hopefully mitigate where we're at, you know, when we have to make the harder decisions. So that's kind of my inclination as we go down this list. And it's not just ticking them all off, because as Robin pointed out yesterday, some of them are interrelated or mutually exclusive. So we're going to have to do some thinking and going down the list and picking the things that make sense as a package. But those are the things that I'd like to do, and I'd like to do them quickly. And I think that's, for example, I think that's exactly what Lacey did when I look at their approach. They immediately cut $6 or $7 million. Half of that was their reserve, spending their reserve. But they made about, I added up about $2.7 million in cuts, just ticking off things like suspension of new hires, suspension of capital projects, furlough part-time staff, suspend equipment purchases, you know, things like that they could do right out of the gate to try to see how much value they could, how they could stretch those moves and avoid the more difficult ones. So that's kind of where I'm at on this whole thing.
And I said it earlier, and I'll say it several more times before this year is out, and that is not all things are equal when it comes to budget, whether it's enhancing or reducing. And that was one of my takeaways from yesterday as well, is that look at everybody individually. It's not one, and not everybody, but every department. Because a one size fits all I don't see that where that's equitable or fair or even reasonable to do a one size fits all. And that was my big takeaway from yesterday as well as we've got to make some decisions and pretty quickly. Go ahead.
Just to follow up, if we get to the point of saying we're going to have to cut, folks, if we want to do that exercise in the way that Commissioner Edwards suggests, by just starting that thinking process by looking at who is on administrative leave, that's fine. I mean, we got to figure out some way to do it. But the nature of this going along with the one size doesn't fit all. I mean, the other big takeaway I had is when we get to that point, there's some peculiarities of different departments that make it difficult. For example, the auditor has to deal with a 2020 presidential election in a crazy, uncertain, unprecedented time. The court has got a dam, as they put it. I think Judge Price talked about, because of the nature of the stay-at-home order, we have this artificial backlog of criminal cases or court cases, court business, I should say, that isn't going to go away because we decide, it isn't just because our revenues are dwindling. The court business is going to be there, and it's going to flow through or not. And that's going to be consequences there. The sheriff talked about how he's had multiple positions that he couldn't fund. So there's just a whole bunch of individualized circumstances that we're going to have to look at. And I'm willing to contemplate any sensible way of going about that. But I'd like to do the easier things first and quicker because we know we're going to be doing some of these things, if not all.
Commissioner Edwards.
Robin, maybe you could help us along here. What's the percentage of the budget dedicated to FTEs?
On the general
Probably
fund?
around 80%.
All of them. I mean, I think it's more than 80%. But go ahead.
Probably. It's at least 80% in the general fund.
But we're gonna have to be looking at other funds that I've heard you say, well, you can't, those are sacred cows. We can't take that because there's restrictions on that fund. I contend we are going to be able to take money out of some of those funds because we're allowed to borrow from those funds. We just have to have a plan in place to pay back eventually to those funds. That's where it goes back to the new reality that we're in and the old rules that we're operating under. So we're gonna have to make some adjustments there and maybe challenge the status quo, if you will. And I think that's doable, but doing other than FTEs is going to, I hate to even say this, but it's gonna be kind of like a drop in the bucket compared to the rest of it. So this isn't gonna be easy, but I think we've set priorities. That's all. That's where I'm kind of hanging my hat for now.
So I would like to say, as far as restricted funds, we can borrow. Current state law allows us to borrow for up to 2 years with interest. But I will also say that the state auditor has already informed local jurisdictions that they will be carefully auditing that we abide by restricted fund rules, and the federal government, as part of the CARES Act, funded a special inspector general to ensure that we follow all the rules imposed with the new funds. So they have increased auditors to ensure that we continue to follow the rules.
Well, those old rules are gonna be adjusted as time goes on, just like many other things. We're all figuring out in society that we can work from home now.
That'll be wonderful when they are.
And
We've
that's
asked
gonna
for
help the environment
We
all
have
the
to
way
change
through. It's gonna do a lot of good things. It's gonna save us office space. There's gonna be a lot of issues that are beneficial from that new reality. And we're gonna have to adjust those old realities to meet the new reality. So it's coming. I don't know exactly the sequence of events that's gonna lead up to that, but we might have to stretch it just a little bit to make it all work until we get it figured out.
Commissioner Menser.
Robin, I had a question. When the assessor was kind of making his plea for not cutting staff, and he was saying, you do whatever you can. I can't remember how he exactly characterized it. He used the road fund as an example. Maximize the road fund shift, maximize the road fund diversion. He mentioned something about IT projects. I guess, having heard what he said there, what other, I mean, I know what the road fund shift and the diversion are. What other things are in the bucket of things that he's talking about based on your understanding? Because I'm not sure what all else would be in that bucket of moves.
So it's my understanding that Stephen was also suggesting that we delay paying into our reserves. So the IT example is, I'd have to look up exactly how much the general fund pays in. Is that one of the things on our list? How much we pay into the large IT reserve?
I think it is.
I think it might.
ER&R is in there.
ER&R is definitely on here. So continuing with the large IT reserve, Stephen is paid in a certain amount toward software that he and the treasurer both need. He is suggesting that for 20 this wouldn't be until 2021, or maybe for the rest of 2020, we suspend the amount that's paid into that reserve and push out when we need to buy the software.
He brought that up at a different meeting.
Right. This year only, we wouldn't pay in. And Dennis is working on the list. This is the other thing that I think we shared with you Tuesday.
He'll be ready to discuss that Tuesday morning.
Right. Dennis is working on the list of all of the IT projects that will be paid out of the large system reserve. And when do we really need them? And how much can be delayed? The thing with a delay is it's exactly that. It's just a delay. It's not a permanent reduction. And some of the money that you make up this year can be a temporary reduction, but some of it simply reduces the base and we'll never get it back. So a lot of what you do has to be permanent and not just kicking the can down the road unless you're prepared to kick it for like 3 years. And that's common in a recession. So we can not pay some of the money into the building reserve. And we could talk about the downside of that. There's a definite downside, but you can reduce the contribution to the building reserve, the ER&R fund, the large IT reserve, the regular IT reserve. You can look at how much we contribute to the risk pool. Now would not be the time to mess around with the unemployment fund. We can look at which other of the reserves that we have, but there aren't a lot of them. But
You say there's,
you've got to pay it back in the long run, though, because the need continues to be there, and you can't delay everything.
you say there's a downside to not paying into the building reserve.
So
And
think about the comments that you received when you were contemplating a new courthouse.
well, I'm thinking of that, and what I was going to say is that you're right. There's a downside, but every decision that we make is going to have a consequence, and they could be a good consequence. So if we do postpone any type of payment, whether it be IT, wherever that paying in the ER&R is reduced, it will kick it down the road a bit, yes, but initially right up front, it might save us, and there's a good consequence for that.
There would be some savings in the short term, but you will need to make it up in the long term. So the hit on your budget comes later, but it comes.
Yeah, it does. But we need to make these decisions now. Go ahead, Gary, we got to wrap it up.
You know, we're gonna be making big decisions and little decisions in this activity that we're embarking on. And just like little things that are gonna be able to be accomplished are, I don't know, the janitorial service, for an example. We might have to empty our own waste baskets, heaven forbid. You know, we might have to wipe off our own countertops. So those are all things those are the little things that we're gonna be doing. The toilet's not gonna get as flushed as much at the courthouse if half the staff is working elsewhere. All little things that we're gonna do, and then we've got the big things. And I think we need to meld those all together and make it work, and we've already set our priorities. I'm gonna harp on that for quite some time.
Okay, Romero, do you want to go ahead and wrap it up then?
Commissioner
Okay,
Mason.
Ty, go ahead, Ty.
Well, your point that we've already set our priorities, you know, I didn't set any priorities. Ramiro and Robin and I don't know who, and department directors made decisions about essential employees and non-essential, and I'm sure by and large those were good decisions, but I don't know that. I haven't looked at it really. I had no say in that. So, you know, the commissioners ultimately are the ones that are going to make these decisions, and the idea that the decision's already made based on decisions that I had no part in is not something that I agree with, just kind of philosophically. I'm willing to look at that as a starting point, but ultimately we have to decide where the priorities are. And I don't know that all of our different, officials and department directors made the choices that I would have made. So just want to just throw that out there.
And I agree with that 100%, but we have to start somewhere.
Okay.
Well, and not to negate what you just said, though, Gary, but as policy setters at this level that we're operating on, our other electeds have a part of this as well, as do the department directors. So when it comes to flush the toilets, wiping our counters, I need to stay up here and make overarching policy decisions. And that might be a piece of it, but I can't dwell a lot of time on who's wiping the counters down and emptying their own trash cans.
Yeah,
Because
I hope you don't waste a lot of time.
But we need to make some big decisions here. Go ahead.
I hope you don't waste a lot of time on it. I'm just saying,
No, I
those
don't
are
want to waste time on
decisions
waste
that
baskets.
are gonna have to be made here internally. Little things and big things. And it all adds up to fewer FTEs because we just don't get there when 80% of our budget is wrapped around FTEs. So if we're gonna go for a certain reduction, it's gonna take reality. And reality
Ramiro.
oftentimes isn't pleasant.
Go ahead and seal this fate. We need to move on.
So a great conversation, commissioners, and the mission before you is extremely complicated. I do agree that every penny counts and every dollar as well counts in order to achieve the $5 million gap, as Robin stated, in half of a year. And this needs to start taking place at July 1st. This is a very difficult decision. As Commissioner Menzer stated, you need to determine what the priorities are. And you as a board needs to decide as to how that gap needs to be filled. Because, and that is before us. And the decisions that are coming before you needs to be taking place as soon as possible. So next week, I personally look forward to the conversation to start getting down into the details as to what alternatives, what options you have, and what policy decisions you will be making and providing directions to all the offices and departments to achieve that $5 million gap. There is no other way as to how we can get to that point.
We need as much time as we can be allotted to do that, Ramiro.
Yeah, I'll make sure next week we probably give you, 3 hours or so if we can find some time. Maybe we can cancel the commissioner's check-in next Thursday. But we'll make sure that we give you ample time to really start going through each of the scenarios they will have presented to you. And again, this is just the scenarios the staff has given you as options. You have a difficult decision to make coming up.
I would like to plant one more seed before we go here.
All right, go ahead and
Got 30
fertilize.
seconds. I believe that each one of the elected officials and department directors need to be taking a look at their own operation and do similar to what the state's doing, do a 10%, 15, 20% reduction tabletop to see what that all boils down to.
That was going to be my final comment, that the directors and electeds, please continue to come up with ideas, email us, email Robin and Ramiro, because it takes everybody to get involved in this one.
I have already engaged the department directors and they're going through that exercise. And I asked them to go through an exercise of a 15 to 20% reduction. And they will be presenting this to myself and Robin. So I think that's a direction that you may want to provide perhaps to the elected offices coming up.
Robin, you have 6 seconds.
No, was just going to say, if you'd like, we could prepare a letter to go out requesting that exercise.
Okay, good. I like the idea. Include them. All right, ready? We're ending this one and getting into the next one.
Yeah, we have a Board of Health coming up.
It's
Right,
a
do we
different
need
Zoom. Okay.
Do we need to leave Zoom and start again or stay here?
Yeah, it's a different Zoom meeting.
Okay. See you, bye. Thanks,
Thank
Olivia. Thanks, Denise.